Under the bright lights of the Olympic stage, athletes chase glory, records, and the honor of representing their nations. But behind the spectacle lies risk, and for some, the dream turned heartbreakingly dark. From shocking accidents to unimaginable disasters, these are 5 of the most horrifying tragedies in Olympic history. Moments where triumph gave way to unimaginable loss. On February 12, 2010, anticipation and nerves filled the icy morning air at the Whistler Sliding Center, where the world's best lugers prepared for their last practice before the Vancouver Winter Olympics began. Carved into a British Columbia mountainside, the course had earned a reputation as the fastest, most technically demanding luge track ever built, with 17 curves and speeds topping 95 miles per hour. Its cutting-edge design thrilled athletes, but also raised alarms after several crashes during training runs. Among those readying for a final descent was 21-year-old Nodar Kumaritashvili of Georgia. Small in stature but brave in spirit, he carried the pride of his nation and the legacy of his father, a former luger. Nodar had grown up training on limited tracks with worn equipment, supported by a family who sacrificed much so he could pursue his Olympic dream. Competing on this global stage was the pinnacle of years of effort, and despite the intimidating track, he was determined to prove himself. Whistler's course, with its steep start and punishing G-forces, pushed sliding technology and athletes to the limit. Officials insisted it met international standards, yet whispers about its extreme speed persisted. Nodar, like others, had wrestled with its unforgiving turns during practice, but remained focused, working with coaches to refine each line through the labyrinth of ice. That morning, he positioned himself on his sled for what should have been another rehearsal. The opening section went smoothly. He carved through the early bends with precision, gradually accelerating. Spectators and staff watched as his sled hurtled toward the lower section, nearing 90 miles per hour. Approaching the final curve, disaster struck in an instant. A slight steering slip combined with blistering speed sent Nodar off his intended path. The sled slammed against the wall, launched upward, and hurled him clear of the track. Traveling at nearly 90 miles per hour, he collided with an exposed steel pillar beyond the safety wall, suffering catastrophic head and neck injuries. Helmets and padding offered no protection from such force. Stunned athletes, coaches, and officials stood frozen as rescue teams rushed in. Medics reached him within moments, but the trauma was too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward at Whistler Healthcare Center, only hours before the game's opening ceremony, a tragedy that darkened what was meant to be a celebration of human achievement. The shocking accident reverberated far beyond the sliding community. Organizers swiftly raised the track's walls, added extra padding, and shortened the start position to slow runs for the competition. In the months that followed, Nodar's death fueled a searching debate about the balance between thrilling speed and athlete safety. Governing bodies ordered worldwide reviews of luge, skeleton, and bobsleigh courses, leading to stricter design standards and emergency protocols. For Georgia, Nodar remained a national hero, remembered for courage and determination despite scarce resources. For the wider Olympic world, his loss was a somber reminder that even in arenas built for excellence, the pursuit of records must never eclipse the duty to protect those who chase them. His final run forever changed sliding sports, leaving behind reforms that continue to safeguard athletes on ice tracks everywhere. On July 27, 1996, Atlanta's warm evening buzzed with music and laughter as thousands of Olympic visitors gathered in Centennial Olympic Park. Designed as the social heart of the Games, the 21-acre plaza hosted concerts, art displays, and meetups that welcomed spectators from around the globe. That night, the band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack kept the crowd dancing under the summer sky, their lively tunes reflecting the celebratory spirit of the Olympics. Among those enjoying the free show was Alice Hawthorne, a 44-year-old mother from Albany, Georgia. She had carefully saved to bring her 14-year-old daughter to the Games, hoping to give her a once-in-a-lifetime memory. Their day had been filled with sightseeing and Olympic events. Now they stood near the stage, faces aglow with excitement. For Alice, the trip was more than entertainment. It was a chance to share an unforgettable moment with her child. Security in the park felt casual compared with guarded stadiums. The venue was meant to be a relaxed gathering spot, a symbol of unity rather than a fortress. Yet on duty that night was security guard Richard Jewell, scanning the crowd with a practiced eye. Close to the sound tower, he spotted an unattended backpack. Inside were 3 pipe bombs packed with nails. Jewell immediately alerted authorities and began clearing spectators from the area. His swift action saved many lives, but there wasn't enough time to protect everyone. At 1:20 a.m., as music played and visitors mingled, The device exploded. The blast ripped through the crowd, hurling metal shards and debris in every direction. The joyous scene dissolved into chaos, screams, smoke, and frantic attempts to flee. Alice was struck by shrapnel, collapsing as her daughter cried out in panic. Around them, more than 100 people suffered injuries, some from flying fragments, others from the crush of the fleeing crowd. Sirens pierced the night as police and medics poured into the park, working feverishly to aid the wounded amid toppled chairs and splintered barriers. What had been a peaceful celebration became a scene of terror. Despite rapid medical attention, Alice's wounds proved fatal. She was the only person killed directly by the bombing, though the attack left deep scars, physical and emotional, on many others. Her daughter survived, but was forever changed by the traumatic loss. The Centennial Olympic Park bombing shocked the world and shattered the sense that the Games were a sanctuary from violence. Yet, even as investigators searched for the perpetrator, the Olympics continued with tightened security. Within hours, checkpoints and bag inspections were strengthened across all venues, and safety planning became an urgent priority. Alice Hawthorne's death came to symbolize the vulnerability of spectators at global events. Her story spurred sweeping reforms in how the Olympics manage public spaces, leading to the comprehensive screening procedures and visible security presence now standard at every Games. Though her life was cut short in a moment meant for joy, the lessons drawn from that tragedy helped safeguard millions of future visitors, ensuring her sacrifice left a legacy of protection. On February 22, 1992, crisp alpine air swept over Les Arcs, France, as Olympic spectators gathered to watch an event unlike any other. Speed skiing, featured as a demonstration sport at the Albertville Games, pushed competitors to exceed 120 miles per hour on sheer mountain slopes. That morning promised flawless conditions. Clear skies, a meticulously prepared course, and snow firm enough for record-breaking runs. It would also be the last time the sport appeared on the Olympic program. Among the athletes preparing was Switzerland's Nicolas Boquete, a 27-year-old veteran of this perilous discipline. Years of training on treacherous slopes had honed his lean physique and precise technique. Within the tight-knit speed skiing community, Nicolas was admired for his composure and mastery of high-velocity dynamics. For him, the Games were a chance to validate a career spent chasing a sport that demanded as much courage as skill. He knew this Olympic appearance might be his only one, and he intended to make it count. The Les Arcs course was notorious for its steep gradient and potential to shatter records. Nicolas had prepared meticulously, testing equipment, studying each section, and fine-tuning his aerodynamic suit to reduce drag. Teammates believed he was a legitimate contender for the podium in this short-lived Olympic showcase. On the morning of the finals, Nicolas joined teammates on a nearby public slope for a warm-up. The run was intended to loosen muscles and sharpen focus before their official attempts. Conditions were nearly perfect. Excellent visibility, solid snow, and calm winds. Everything about the moment felt routine to an athlete who had spent years flirting with speed's edge. As Nicolas descended, he encountered a small rise in the terrain. Skiers in this discipline often glide airborne for brief seconds, and he handled the bump with practiced ease. But as he landed, a danger appeared. An active snow grooming machine maneuvering along the slope. Its lights flashed and its siren blared, but Nicolas was traveling far too fast to divert. Within an instant, he collided with the massive snowcat. The impact was catastrophic, causing injuries that claimed his life at once. The accident happened around 9:30 a.m., stunning onlookers and shaking Olympic organizers unaccustomed to such tragedy during preparations. The Swiss delegation, grief-stricken, withdrew several athletes from the finals in his memory. Yet the competition went ahead as scheduled, framed by an unmistakable pall of loss. Nicolas Boquete's death underscored the razor-thin margin between triumph and disaster in extreme sports. Speed skiing had been created to celebrate audacious athleticism, but his accident forced officials to reassess its place on the world stage. The event was dropped from all future Games, ending its brief Olympic tenure. Beyond the Games, the crash inspired changes. Safety measures for high-risk winter sports grew stricter, with closer attention to course access, equipment use, and separation between athletes and machinery. Discussions about balancing spectacle with responsibility gained urgency across international federations. For those who knew Nicolas, he remained more than a cautionary tale. He was a disciplined, fearless competitor who pursued excellence on the limits of control. Though his career was cut short on the eve of its greatest moment, his legacy influenced how organizers safeguard athletes in dangerous pursuits. The mountain where he fell continues to echo his commitment to a sport that demanded everything: speed, precision, and an unflinching heart. On July 14, 1912, the midsummer sun blazed over Stockholm, turning the Swedish capital into a furnace as marathon runners assembled at the Olympic Stadium. Ahead lay 40.2 kilometers of dusty roads stretching through the countryside, a course that would test even the most seasoned endurance athletes. By midday, temperatures approached 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a punishing heat few had anticipated. The Stockholm Games were only the fifth modern Olympics, held in an era when sports medicine was rudimentary and safety protocols for endurance events barely existed. Water stations were sparse, medical support minimal, and athletes were expected to fend for themselves against the elements. Among the competitors was Francisco Lazaro, a determined 21-year-old from Lisbon, representing Portugal's first-ever Olympic marathon entry. He carried the pride of an entire nation on his lean shoulders. Portugal had little experience with elite athletics, and resources for training were scarce, yet Francisco's talent and perseverance had brought him to this world stage. He had prepared as best he could in Portugal's milder climate, but nothing in his background matched the fierce Scandinavian heat waiting for him that day. Like many athletes of the time, Francisco relied on advice now understood to be dangerously misguided. Before the race, he coated his body with a thick layer of wax and oil, hoping to prevent sweat from causing chafing or slowing him down. Instead, the coating would seal in heat, crippling his body's ability to regulate temperature, a decision that would have tragic consequences. The starting gun cracked, and the runners surged from the stadium into the countryside. Dust rose from the unpaved roads, mixing with shimmering waves of heat. Francisco paced himself cautiously at first, maintaining steady strides as he sought to conserve energy for the grueling distance ahead. Spectators lined parts of the route, cheering as the athletes pressed on, but little support awaited them beyond encouragement. There were only a handful of water stations, and medical personnel were nowhere along the course. As the race progressed, the relentless sun exacted its toll. Runners began to falter, some slowing to a walk, others dropping out altogether. Francisco, though clearly laboring, pressed on with quiet determination. He was running not only for himself, but for a country eager to make its mark on the Olympic map. By the halfway point, however, the signs of danger were unmistakable. His stride grew uneven, his face pale beneath a sheen of trapped perspiration. Witnesses later reported that his lips were cracked and his movements seemed mechanical, driven purely by willpower. Near the 19th mile, Francisco's body could no longer endure the strain. His temperature had climbed to a perilous level, later estimated at 106 degrees Fahrenheit. He staggered, then collapsed onto the sun-baked road. Passers-by rushed to assist, and he was taken to a Stockholm hospital. But treatment options for severe heat stroke in 1912 were limited and crude. Despite doctors' efforts, he never regained consciousness. In the early hours of July 15th, Francisco Lazaro died, becoming the first Olympic athlete to lose his life as a direct result of competition. News of his death reverberated throughout the Games and beyond. Officials, athletes, and spectators alike were stunned that an event intended to celebrate endurance and triumph could lead to such tragedy. For Portugal, the loss was deeply personal. Their first marathon runner, who had set out to honor his nation, had perished in pursuit of that goal. Francisco was mourned as a hero, his funeral drawing widespread attention and sympathy from the international sporting community. His passing also became a turning point for Olympic safety. Organizers recognized that endurance races required structured support, shaded rest points, frequent water supplies, and medical teams along the route. Future marathons would adopt these precautions, shaping the modern standards that safeguard athletes today. Francisco Lazaro's story endures as a sobering reminder of both courage and vulnerability. He embodied the Olympic spirit, giving everything in pursuit of a dream. Though his life ended far too soon, his sacrifice prompted reforms that have protected countless runners since that sweltering day in Stockholm. On August 26, 1960, the blazing Roman sun bore down mercilessly on the Olympic cycling course. Temperatures climbed past 104 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the 100-kilometer team time trial into a punishing test of stamina and survival. One of the favorites for a medal was the Danish squad, a tightly drilled quartet whose strength lay in precision, pacing, and relentless discipline. But on that searing afternoon, the riders would face far more than their rivals. they would battle conditions that threatened their very lives. Among them was Knud Enemark Jensen, a determined 23-year-old who had dedicated years to reaching the sport's highest stage. Lean and wiry, he had trained through Denmark's frigid winters and raced across Europe to refine the speed and resilience demanded by Olympic competition. For Jensen, Rome represented the culmination of ambition, sacrifice, and countless miles on the saddle. The Danish team had prepared meticulously for the event, studying every rise and curve of the Roman route. The course featured stretches of open road exposed to the sun, gentle hills, and technical turns where efficiency and teamwork could decide medals. Yet the weather presented a challenge no one had fully anticipated. Few athletes in 1960 had experience racing in such oppressive heat, and sports science offered limited guidance on hydration and electrolyte loss. Riders relied on instinct, experience, and a drive to persevere, sometimes at the expense of safety. The race began with confidence. The Danes set a strong rhythm, Jensen tucked behind his teammates in an aerodynamic line. Early on, they held pace with the best squads, their strategy unfolding exactly as rehearsed. But as the kilometers ticked by, the temperature climbed higher, and the strain of maintaining speed under the punishing sun became evident. Sweat streamed from beneath helmets, and muscles began to cramp as riders fought dehydration. Midway through the trial, Jensen's form began to falter. Observers later recalled that he looked pale and unsteady, his pedal stroke losing its fluidity. The heat was overwhelming his body's cooling systems, yet he kept pushing, unwilling to let down his country or his teammates. Support crews had little opportunity to intervene. The era's medical oversight was rudimentary, and athletes were largely left to manage their own well-being. As the race entered its final stages, Jensen's distress deepened. Then, without warning, he collapsed, tumbling from his bicycle and striking his head hard on the pavement. Teammates and officials rushed to his side, finding him unconscious in the scorching road. The severity of his condition was obvious. He was suffering not only from a catastrophic fall, but from the ravages of extreme heat stroke. Jensen was rushed by ambulance to a nearby hospital in Rome, where doctors worked urgently to stabilize him. They treated him for a fractured skull and for the effects of hyperthermia, but medical tools and knowledge of the time offered little hope for someone so gravely stricken. Despite their efforts, Knud Enemark Jensen succumbed to his injuries, his life cut short just hours after the event. His death shocked the Olympic community and sent tremors through the world of cycling. It was a stark reminder that athletic pursuit, particularly under extreme conditions, could exact an unbearable cost. Investigations into the tragedy spurred calls for better protections, stricter weather protocols, on-course medical support, and deeper research into the effects of heat on endurance athletes. Jensen's legacy endures not only as a talented young cyclist lost too soon, but also as a catalyst for reform. Safety measures introduced in subsequent decades, from shaded feeding zones and improved helmets to comprehensive medical monitoring, owe much to lessons learned from that harrowing day in Rome. His sacrifice helped shape the safeguards that allow today's riders to chase glory with far greater protection against the dangers he bravely faced.